You're calling because I took our son? No, Daniel, I discovered your plan to destroy me. I didn't take him, I saved him.
The plane had barely left the runway when my phone began vibrating again. My husband had called 23 times. I finally answered and his voice exploded through the speaker. Claire, where are you? You took our son. I looked at the sleeping 8-year-old beside me, then out at the city shrinking beneath the clouds. No, Daniel, I said quietly. I saved him. Hello, my name is Claire Bennett, and until 3 weeks ago, I believed my husband's worst secret was another woman. I was wrong. His affair was only the door. Behind it was a plan to take my home, my company, my reputation, and finally my son. Daniel and I had been married for 11 years. To everyone around us, we were the kind of couple people envied. We lived in a restored colonial house outside Boston. Our son Noah attended a good school. Daniel drove a black luxury SUV and told people he was a strategy consultant. I owned a small but successful medical software company called Havenbridge Systems. At least, I believed I owned it. I had started Havenbridge in my mother's laundry room before I met Daniel. The first version was little more than a scheduling program for community clinics. I wrote the code at night and answered support calls during the day. By the time Noah was born, the company had contracts in 6 states. Daniel loved telling people he had helped me build it. The truth was that he had arrived after the foundation was already poured. Still, I gave him a ceremonial advisory title, because he was my husband and I trusted him. That trust became the weapon he planned to use against me. The first sign appeared on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was packing Noah's lunch when he asked, "Mom, are you sick?" I stopped spreading peanut butter. "Why would you ask that?" He stared at the kitchen floor. "Dad said you might need to go somewhere to rest." I forced a smile. "I'm tired sometimes, honey. That doesn't mean I'm sick." He told Grandma I might live with him for a while. Grandma meant Daniel's mother, Margaret. She had never forgiven me for refusing to make Daniel a co-owner of Havenbridge. To her, marriage meant everything I earned should become her son's property. "Did Dad say when?" I asked. Noah shook his head. Then he looked toward the hallway and whispered, "He told me not to tell you." That sentence stayed with me all day. That evening, Daniel arrived home smelling of cedar cologne. It was not his cologne. He kissed the air beside my cheek and asked what was for dinner. While he showered, I checked the pocket of his suit jacket. I hated myself for doing it, but my hands moved before my conscience could stop them. I found a hotel receipt from Providence. 1 room, 2 breakfasts. The previous Friday, Daniel had told me he spent that night in New York. When he came downstairs, I placed the receipt beside his plate. He looked at it for less than a second. Then he laughed. "You went through my clothes. Who was with you?" "A client." "You ordered 2 breakfasts." The client came to my room for an early meeting. At 7 in the morning. His face changed, not into guilt, into concern, the way a doctor looks at a confused patient. "Claire, you've been under enormous pressure," he said. "You haven't been sleeping, now you're inventing stories." I'm holding the receipt. A receipt isn't an affair. He reached across the table but not to take my hand. He took the paper, folded it twice, and slipped it into his pocket. "You should talk to someone," he said. That was the moment the air in my own kitchen felt dangerous. The next morning I called my college friend, Maya Torres. Maya was a family law attorney in Chicago, and the only person I knew who could hear an ugly truth without decorating it. I told her about the receipt, Noah's warning, and Daniel's strange calm. "Don't confront him again," she said, "and don't use any device he can access." "You think he is having an affair?" "I think an affair may be the smallest problem." She asked whether Daniel had access to my business records. My stomach tightened. "He has an advisory login." "Remove it." "Hell no." "Then don't remove it yet. Create a new administrative account he can't see. Download access logs, bank statements, insurance policies, medical records, anything involving you or Noah." I waited until Daniel left for work, then drove to a public library 2 towns away. From a computer in the far corner, I entered Havenbridge's security portal. Daniel's advisory account had opened 47 files in the previous 2 months. Most of them had nothing to do with strategy. He had viewed ownership documents, key person insurance, payroll, employee contracts, and the company's emergency succession plan. 3 weeks earlier, someone had also changed the recovery email on my executive account. I changed it back, activated a hardware security key, and called our head of cybersecurity, a quiet former Air Force specialist named Lina Wu. "Do not alert anyone," I told her. "Create a private audit and send the results only to this new address." 2 hours later, Lena called. Claire, this is bigger than an unauthorized login, she said. Someone has been copying executive files to an outside server. Whose credentials? She hesitated. Yours. I almost dropped the phone. That's impossible. The login came from your home network after midnight. It used your password and a backup code. And Daniel knew where I kept the backup codes, in a sealed envelope inside the bedroom safe. When I returned home, the envelope looked untouched. But under a bright lamp, I saw a thin cut along its bottom edge. That night, Daniel poured me a glass of wine. I pretended to drink while he watched. Within 30 minutes, my eyelids felt heavy. I excused myself, carried the glass upstairs, and poured the remaining wine into a clean travel bottle. Then I locked it inside an old suitcase in the guest room closet. I slept with Noah's baseball bat under my bed. At 1:17 in the morning, I heard Daniel enter the room. I kept my breathing slow. He stood beside me for almost a minute. Then he lifted my phone from the nightstand and pressed my thumb against the screen. The phone unlocked. I wanted to open my eyes. I wanted to scream. Instead, I stayed still. He carried the phone into the bathroom and closed the door. The next morning, I told him I had a headache. He smiled with gentle satisfaction. You really should see a doctor. I took the wine sample to a private laboratory. The technician said the test would take 3 days. 3 days was too long. The second shock came from Noah's school. His teacher called to ask whether everything was all right at home. Noah has been unusually anxious, she said, and yesterday his father requested copies of his attendance records. Why? He said they were needed for a custody evaluation. The room seemed to tilt. There is no custody evaluation. The teacher became quiet. Mrs. Bennett, he gave us a letter from an attorney. I asked her to send me a copy. The attorney was Rebecca Sloan. I knew the name. She had been Daniel's client in Providence. Her law firm specialized in high-value divorce, corporate ownership disputes, and emergency custody orders. Maya ran a background search and called me that evening. Rebecca isn't only his lawyer, she said. She formed a company with Daniel 4 months ago, Northstar Health Holdings. What does it own? Nothing yet. But its registration papers describe it as a medical software acquisition company. My company. Daniel was not simply preparing to leave me. He and Rebecca were preparing to take Haven Bridge with them. I searched the attic office while Daniel attended a charity dinner. Behind a stack of old tax files, I found a small locked case. I used a screwdriver to force it open. Inside was a second phone. The screen was protected, but Daniel had used the same 6-digit code for years. Noah's birthday. The messages were worse than I imagined. Rebecca had written, "Once she has a documented breakdown, the board will remove her." Daniel replied, "Margaret's statement will establish instability. The therapist is ready." Another message read, "After temporary custody is granted, she'll sign anything to see Noah." And then I found the sentence that turned my fear into ice. "If she refuses the settlement, the insurance solves the rest." Haven Bridge carried a $12 million key person insurance policy on me. I photographed every message with a camera that was not connected to our home network. I copied the phone's contents and returned everything exactly as I found it. The laboratory called the next morning. The wine contained zolpidem, a prescription sleep medicine. I had never been prescribed zolpidem. Daniel had been drugging me. Suddenly, the past month made sense. The mornings I woke with no memory of going to bed, the missed video meetings, the strange email I supposedly sent at 200 a.m., the broken glass Margaret had photographed during Sunday dinner. They were not collecting evidence of a breakdown. They were manufacturing it. I wanted to take Noah and run that day. Maya stopped me. "If you disappear without preparation, Daniel will call it parental kidnapping," she warned. "We need a legal route, evidence, and a safe destination." "How can I leave him there?" "You won't, but we do this carefully." We created a plan. First, I met with a Massachusetts criminal defense attorney and gave him copies of the drug test and messages. Second, Lena preserved the company logs so Daniel could not erase them. Third, my board chair quietly suspended all advisory access without announcing it. Finally, Maya arranged a legitimate reason for Noah and me to fly to Chicago, my aunt's 70th birthday. Daniel knew about the trip. He simply believed I was traveling alone. That became important later. 2 nights before our flight, Margaret came to dinner carrying a lemon cake and a performance of concern. "Claire, dear, Daniel says you've been confused lately." "Does he?" "We'll all want what is best for Noah." I placed my fork down. "And what is that?" She looked at Daniel before answering. "Stability." Daniel touched her arm as if she had said too much. Then Noah came into the dining room holding a folder. "Dad, is this my new school?" Every adult froze. Daniel stood so quickly his chair scraped the floor. He took the folder from Noah and closed it. I had seen the logo. Westbrook Academy was in Connecticut, 20 minutes from Margaret's house. It's nothing, Daniel said. It has my name on it. Noah replied. Daniel sent him upstairs. After Noah left, I asked, "You applied to another school without telling me." "It was only a backup." "A backup for what?" Margaret smiled. "For when your work becomes too much." I looked at Daniel and understood their timeline. They planned to move Noah before I could fight. That night, I opened the Westbrook folder after Daniel fell asleep. The application listed Margaret as Noah's primary emergency contact. My name appeared under a section marked non-custodial parent. There was also a copy of a petition Daniel intended to file Monday morning. It requested emergency sole custody based on my alleged drug abuse, erratic behavior, and plan to flee the state with Noah. Monday was the day after my supposed solo trip to Chicago. They intended to file while I was away, claim I had abandoned Noah, and lock me out before I returned. I photographed everything. Then I changed the plan. On Friday morning, I packed one suitcase for myself and one for Noah. I included his birth certificate, medication, school records, and the worn blue blanket he still reached for after nightmares. At breakfast, Daniel barely looked up from his phone. "Your car comes at 9, he asked. "Les. Have a good trip." He kissed my forehead like a husband in a commercial. After the car pulled away, I asked the driver to stop at Noah's school. The school had already received the paperwork from my attorney. I signed Noah out for an approved family trip. His teacher hugged him and quietly placed his favorite class book into his backpack. At the airport, my hands shook so badly I entered the wrong security code twice. Every uniform looked like a police officer coming to stop me. Every announcement sounded like Daniel's name. But we reached the gate. We boarded. Noah took the window seat. As the cabin doors closed, my phone began vibrating. Then Margaret. Then Daniel again. By the time we reached the runway, there were 23 calls. I knew exactly when he had discovered Noah was gone. He must have arrived at the school expecting to pick him up early. Perhaps he planned to take him to Margaret's house before filing the petition. The plane lifted into the air. I answered. "Claire, where are you?" Daniel shouted. "You took our son." Noah looked at me, frightened. I squeezed his hand. "No, Daniel," I said. "I saved him." "Bring him back right now?" "You knew about my trip." "Not with Noah!" "You can't cross state lines with him." "There is no custody order stopping me." Silence. He had not expected me to know that. "You're unstable," he said. "Everyone sees it. If you cooperate, we can help you." "Does Rebecca help all her clients by sharing a hotel room with them?" His breathing stopped. I continued before courage could leave me. "And does she always create acquisition companies with married men before trying to steal their wives' businesses?" "Claire, listen to me." I listened for 11 years. "You have no idea what you're doing." "Actually, I do. Your access to Haven Bridge was suspended at 8 this morning. Every file you copied has been traced. The wine is being held as evidence. And the second phone in the attic was very informative." He whispered my name. For the first time since I had known him, Daniel sounded afraid. "If anything happens to me or Noah," I said, "the full record goes to the police, the board and 3 separate attorneys." That last part was partly a bluff. The police already had the record. I ended the call and turned off my phone. Noah asked, "Is Dad in trouble?" I looked at my son's face and chose the only honest answer he was old enough to carry. "Your father made some dangerous choices. None of them are your fault." In Chicago, Maya met us at the airport with her husband and 2 private security officers. We went directly to a family court, where a judge reviewed the drug analysis, school application, threatening messages, and Daniel's prepared petition. That afternoon, I received temporary sole custody and a protective order. Daniel was forbidden from contacting Noah outside supervised legal channels. I thought we were safe. Then my company's chief financial officer called. "Claire, someone initiated a $9 million transfer from the reserve account." The request used my digital signature. Daniel and Rebecca were trying to empty Haven Bridge before their access disappeared completely. "Stop the transfer. The bank says it has already entered international processing." I called Lena. She traced the request to a laptop in Rebecca's Boston office. We sent the evidence to federal investigators and the bank's fraud division. For 6 hours, no one could tell me whether the money would return. At midnight, the bank froze the receiving account in the Cayman Islands. The money had moved, but not beyond reach. Daniel's panic became desperation. He sent Maya a message offering me a deal. If I returned with Noah, he would forget the misunderstanding and allow me to keep half my company. Half of what had always been mine. I declined. The next morning, Daniel appeared on local television. He stood outside our house with Margaret beside him and tears in his eyes. He told a reporter that his mentally ill wife had abducted their son after suffering a professional breakdown. He asked the public to help bring Noah home. The story spread quickly. My inbox filled with strangers calling me a criminal. Several Havenbridge clients paused contract negotiations. 2 board members asked whether I should take temporary leave. For one terrible hour, Daniel's lies seemed to be winning. Then I remembered something my father taught me: a liar wants you to answer with emotion, because emotion is easy to question. Documents are harder. My attorney released a short statement confirming that Noah was safe with me under a valid court order. We disclosed no private details about him. At the same time, the board received the cybersecurity audit, the attempted transfer records, and Daniel's messages with Rebecca. The 2 board members withdrew their request. By evening, every Havenbridge director had voted to remove Daniel permanently from all company roles. Rebecca's law firm placed her on leave. Margaret stopped appearing beside television cameras, but Daniel was not finished. 3 days later, I received a video from an unknown number. It showed the inside of my Chicago rental apartment. The camera moved past the kitchen, down the hall, and stopped outside Noah's bedroom. A message appeared beneath it. Yo kainidi farvar. I called the police and moved Noah to a protected location. Investigators discovered that Daniel had paid a private investigator named Curtis Vale to follow us from the airport. Curtis had used a maintenance uniform to enter the apartment building. When police arrested him, he agreed to cooperate. He had recordings of Daniel giving instructions. One recording changed the entire case. Daniel told Curtis, "I don't care how you do it. Get the boy back before the hearing. If Claire resists, make it look like she lost control." Curtis asked, "And if she gets hurt?" Daniel answered, "Then the insurance pays." Daniel was arrested the next morning. Rebecca was arrested 2 days later for her role in the fraud and conspiracy. Margaret was not charged, but her sworn statement claiming I abused drugs collapsed when pharmacy records showed the sleeping medication had been prescribed to her. She had supplied it to Daniel. Our final custody hearing took place 4 months later. Daniel entered the courtroom wearing a gray suit, and the expression he had used throughout our marriage, whenever he wanted others to see him as reasonable. His attorney described him as a frightened father who had made mistakes under stress. Then the prosecutor played the recording. "If Claire resists, make it look like she lost control." Daniel's face went empty. "And if she gets hurt, then the insurance pays." A no speech could survive those words. The judge awarded me sole legal and physical custody. Any future contact between Daniel and Noah would depend on criminal proceedings, professional evaluation, and Noah's welfare. The divorce followed. Daniel demanded half of Havenbridge, claiming years of unpaid strategic work. My lawyers produced the copied files, the false signatures, the shell company, and the attempted theft. He received nothing from the company. Our house was sold. My share went into a trust for Noah and a new home far from Margaret. Rebecca lost her license to practice law. Her firm sued her for damage to its reputation. Northstar Health Holdings was dissolved before it ever acquired a single thing. Daniel eventually pleaded guilty to conspiracy, wire fraud, unlawful surveillance, and drug-related charges. The sentence did not return the years I spent trusting him, but it gave Noah and me something more valuable than revenge. It gave us distance. 6 months after the flight, Noah and I moved to a quiet town near Lake Michigan. He started at a new school where nobody knew him as the missing boy from television. I moved Havenbridge's headquarters to Chicago and created a security program for employees facing domestic abuse. We also began donating our clinic software to shelters and legal aid organizations. One autumn evening, Noah and I sat on the porch watching leaves move across the yard. He asked, "Were you scared on the plane?" "More scared than I had ever been." "Then why were you smiling?" I remembered looking through that small window as Boston disappeared below us. I had not smiled because I had won. At that moment, I did not know whether I would win. I smiled because, for the first time, Daniel did not know what I was going to do. For years, he had studied my kindness and mistaken it for weakness. He believed love had made me blind. He believed motherhood would make me easy to threaten. Instead, motherhood made me impossible to stop. I put my arm around Noah and told him, "Sometimes courage does not feel like courage. Sometimes it feels like fear that keeps moving." The plane ride did not end my marriage. Daniel had ended it long before, one lie at a time. The flight simply carried me beyond the reach of the future he had designed for me. He tried to write me as the unstable wife, the careless mother, and the woman who would surrender everything to keep her child. He was right about only one thing. I would do anything for my son. But surrender was never one of those things.